The year was 2187, and humanity had finally earned its seat among the stars, not through conquest or glory, but through sheer stubbornness and a refusal to die quietly on a single planet. The Galactic Concord was an alliance of 42 spacefaring civilizations, and every single one of them was older, stronger, and more advanced than the human race. Earth was the infant at the table, barely worth a glance from the ancient empires that had been sailing between galaxies for millennia. The joint military summit on Varath Prime was supposed to be a celebration of unity, a grand showcase where each member species displayed their weapons, their soldiers, and their doctrine for all to admire. It was held aboard a colossal orbital station the size of a small moon, and delegations from every corner of the galaxy filled its polished halls with the hum of 100 alien languages. The most feared delegation belonged to the Dralith Dominion. Their supreme general, Vorath Kale, entered the exhibition hall like a storm given flesh. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, wrapped in black ceremonial armor that had been forged from the hulls of ships he had personally destroyed. His scales were the color of iron, his eyes burned like dying suns, and every step he took echoed through the chamber like a war drum. He had conquered 11 star systems and crushed rebellions on more worlds than most species had ever visited. Behind him marched 24 iron-scale soldiers, the Dralith elite, each one carrying plasma lances that hummed with barely contained energy. The other delegations parted for them, the way water parts for a blade. Earth's delegation was smaller. Admiral Catherine Holt walked at the front, with her spine straight and her jaw set. She was a tall woman, with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of calm that only came from decades of command. She did not flinch when Vorath Kale turned his massive head to study her, and she did not look away when his burning eyes swept over her soldiers with open contempt. Behind Holt walked a small honor guard of mixed-branch service members, 6 soldiers in total, wearing standard-issue combat fatigues that looked almost comically plain next to the glowing armor and energy shields worn by every other species in the room. Among them was a man who did not stand out at all. Master Sergeant Elijah Cole, Eli to the few people who knew him well enough to use the name, was 38 years old, lean and sun-weathered, with the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. He came from a small town in East Texas, where the sky was wide and the people were quiet. And he carried himself the same way he had carried himself since boot camp, shoulders relaxed, eyes forward, mouth shut. Slung across his back was a rifle. It was a modified M110A2 SASS, chambered in .338 Norma Magnum, and fitted with a smart optic scope that could calculate wind drift and bullet drop in real time. To Eli, it was the finest weapon ever built by human hands. To every alien in the room, it looked like a museum piece, a relic from an age before civilization had truly begun. The weapons exhibition started with the Valesi Collective, an insectoid hive mind species that unveiled a swarm drone network capable of blanketing an entire battlefield in autonomous killing machines. The drones moved like a living cloud, and the crowd murmured with approval. Next came the Thessari, a physically frail but brilliantly intelligent species who demonstrated graviton disruptors that could crush a tank into a ball the size of a fist from half a kilometer away. The crowd applauded. Then the Korvathi showed their hard-like shield generators, walls of solid energy that could stop a starship's cannon at point-blank range. The crowd was genuinely impressed. And then came the Dralith. Vorath Kale stepped forward, and his soldiers raised their plasma lances in perfect unison. A single blast from one lance melted a 3-foot-thick slab of reinforced titanium into glowing slag in under 2 seconds. The heat washed over the crowd like a wave, and several delegates stepped back involuntarily. Vorath did not smile. Smiling was beneath him, but his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of dominance. Then it was Earth's turn. Admiral Holt stepped to the display table with calm precision. She gestured to the weapons laid out before her: rifles, sidearms, grenades, and ammunition. She explained the principles clearly and without apology. Controlled chemical explosions, propelling shaped metal projectiles at high velocity through rifled barrels. The room went quiet for a moment, and then the laughter began. It started with the Velesi, a clicking, chittering sound that rippled through their delegation like wind through dry leaves. The Korvathi joined in with low, rumbling chuckles. Even the Thessari, usually too polite for open mockery, exchanged looks of disbelief. Vorath Kale walked to the table. He picked up Eli's sniper rifle with one massive clawed hand, holding it the way a grown man might hold a child's toy. He turned it over, examined the barrel, the stock, the scope. His lip curled. "You propel metal with controlled explosions?" he said, his deep voice carrying across the entire hall without effort. "My hatchlings play with sharper toys." He dropped the rifle onto the table with a heavy clatter that made Admiral Holt's jaw tighten, but she did not react beyond that. The alien generals laughed again. Aides whispered to each other behind their hands. A Korvathi officer gestured at the ammunition and made a joke in his own language that sent his entire delegation into fits. Eli Cole said nothing. He stepped forward, picked up his rifle from the table, inspected it with the careful hands of a man who had done this 10,000 times before, and slung it back over his shoulder. His face showed nothing, no anger, no embarrassment, no wounded pride. He simply stood there, quiet as a stone, and waited. Admiral Holt allowed the laughter to die on its own. She did not try to argue or defend or explain. She simply looked at the assembled generals and said 5 words in a voice as steady as bedrock: "We look forward to the trials." The Concord had announced a joint species combat trial, a massive wargame scenario to be held on the uninhabited jungle world of Corvan 9. Every member species would field a small fire team, and the teams would compete in a complex tactical exercise designed to test coordination, combat effectiveness, and adaptability under pressure. The Drelith were the overwhelming favorites. No one had beaten them in a joint trial in over 60 years, and Vorath Kale's Iron Scale Vanguard was considered the deadliest small-unit fighting force in the known galaxy. No one even considered the humans a contender. As the delegations filed out of the exhibition hall, a Thessari analyst paused beside Admiral Holt and spoke in a voice like rustling silk. "Your weapons are fascinating in a historical sense, Admiral. But surely you understand that kinetic projectiles have no place on a modern battlefield." Holt glanced at Eli, who was already walking toward the exit, with his rifle on his shoulder and his eyes on nothing in particular. "We will see," she said, and that was all she said. 3 days later, 24 fire teams from across the galaxy loaded into dropships and prepared to descend into the green hell of Corvan 9, a planet of towering fungal forests, electromagnetic storms, and predators that had never learned to fear anything. Cole sat in the corner of the human dropship, his rifle across his knees, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and even. Across from him, his 3 teammates, Corporal Una Park, Sergeant Dio Okonkwo, and Private First Class Maria Delgado, checked their gear in silence. None of them spoke. They did not need to. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson that humanity had been teaching itself for 1,000 years, that the most dangerous weapon in any war is not the one that glows the brightest or makes the loudest noise. It is the one you never see coming. Corvan Ixpix hit them like a wall the moment the dropship doors opened. The air was thick and wet and tasted like copper, and the jungle stretched out in every direction like a living thing that had been growing unchecked since the birth of the planet. Towering fungal trees rose hundreds of feet into the sky, their trunks wider than buildings, their canopies so dense that sunlight only reached the ground in thin golden threads. The floor of the jungle was a carpet of rotting vegetation, bioluminescent moss, and root systems that twisted and coiled like the veins of some enormous sleeping creature. The electromagnetic interference was the first thing that hit the alien teams, and it hit them hard. The Valesi Collective deployed their autonomous drone swarm within minutes of landing, and within minutes of deployment, the swarm began to fail. The electromagnetic storms that rolled through the fungal canopy scrambled navigation systems, disrupted communication relays, and sent half the drones spiraling into tree trunks like blind insects. The Valesi commander shrieked orders in rapid clicks, but there was nothing to be done. The jungle was eating their technology alive. The Korvathi fared little better. Their hardlight shields flickered and stuttered in the electromagnetic wash, and their targeting arrays, designed to lock onto energy signatures from orbit, were useless in a jungle that pulsed with its own natural electrical field. Every tree, every fungal bloom, every patch of bioluminescent moss registered as a false positive on their scanners, and the Korvathi soldiers found themselves jumping at shadows that were not there. Even the Draelith Ironscale Vanguard felt the sting. Their powered exoskeletons still functioned. The Draelith built their equipment to survive anything, but their long-range plasma targeting systems were degraded to less than half effectiveness, and their communications were reduced to short-range bursts that barely reached 50 meters through the dense canopy. Subgeneral Thrawn, the Ironscale field commander, compensated by tightening his formation and pushing his soldiers toward the central fortress at maximum speed. The Draelith did not need technology to be dangerous. They were 7-foot-tall armored predators with centuries of combat experience, and they trusted their strength above all else. Thrawn reached the fortress ruin within 3 hours and seized it without resistance. The ancient stone structure sat on a hill at the center of the jungle, half consumed by fungal growth, but still defensible, and Thrawn set his 12 Ironscale soldiers around its perimeter like an iron crown. He removed his helmet to issue orders. The electromagnetic interference made helmet comms unreliable at that range, and his deep voice carried across the hilltop with the authority of a general who had never lost a battle. No alien team was able to take the fortress from them. The Valesi Collective tried first. They sent their surviving drones ahead as a screen and charged the hill with their infantry in a clicking, shittering wave. The Ironscales met them with disciplined plasma fire that turned the jungle floor into a hellscape of burning vegetation and molten earth. The Valesi assault lasted 90 seconds before every last insectoid soldier was tagged and eliminated. It was not even close. A joint force of Korvathi and 2 smaller species tried next, approaching from 3 directions in a coordinated pincer. The Ironscales held their ground and broke each prong of the attack in sequence, using their powered exoskeletons to absorb incoming fire, and their plasma lances to annihilate anything that moved. The battle lasted 4 minutes, and when it was over, Thrawn stood on the fortress wall and roared his victory into the jungle. 14 teams had been eliminated by the end of the first day, most of them by the Draelith, and the rest by each other or by the jungle itself. A Thessari squad had been forced to withdraw after encountering a predator the size of a ground transport that their graviton disruptors could barely slow down. 2 other teams simply vanished into the fungal depths and were never heard from again. The human team had not been heard from at all. Eli Cole had not gone toward the fortress. While every other team had raced to seize the objective or engage the enemy, Eli had taken his team in the opposite direction, deeper into the jungle, away from the fighting, away from the noise. Corporal Una Park walked at his side with a spotting scope and a medkit, reading the terrain the way her grandmother had taught her to read the mountains of Gangwon province, not with instruments, but with her eyes and her instincts. Sergeant Dio Okonkwo moved behind them with the heavy kit, a stocky and powerful man from Lagos who carried 200 pounds of equipment through the jungle like it weighed nothing. and Private First Class Maria Delgado, Ghost, moved ahead as their scout, slipping through the undergrowth so quietly that even Eli sometimes lost track of her. They did not use comms. The electromagnetic interference made them useless, but that was not the reason. The reason was that they did not need them. Eli communicated with hand signals, a closed fist for stop, 2 fingers forward for move, a flat palm for danger. His team responded instantly, without hesitation, without questions. They had trained together for 2 years, and they could read each other the way musicians read sheet music, with a fluency that went beyond words. They moved through the jungle like they belonged there. Eli read the ground the way his grandfather had taught him to read the pine forests of East Texas. The bent stems that showed where an animal had passed, the disturbed soil that marked a predator's territory, the faint chemical smell that warned of toxic fungal blooms. He adjusted their path constantly, steering them around danger with the casual precision of a man walking through his own backyard. Ghost Delgado scouted 3 kilometers ahead on the second morning and came back with a hand-drawn map of the terrain between their position and the fortress. She had sketched it on the back of a ration wrapper with a pencil stub, marking elevation changes, sight lines, wind corridors, and the location of every Draelith sentry she had observed. Eli studied the map for 10 minutes in silence. Then he pointed to a ridge on the eastern side of the fortress, a natural elevation concealed behind a wall of fungal growth, exactly 1,400 meters from the fortress courtyard where Thrawn had set up his command position. There, he said. That was all he said. It took them 6 hours to reach the ridge. They moved slowly and deliberately, stopping every time the wind shifted to reapply natural camouflage. Crushed fungal matter smeared over their ghillie suits until they smelled like the jungle itself. They crossed 2 streams by wading chest-deep through water thick with bioluminescent algae, and they passed within 30 meters of a sleeping predator without waking it, because Eli had read the wind and known exactly which path would keep their scent downwind. When they reached the ridge, Eli lay prone behind a fallen fungal trunk and assembled his firing position with the unhurried patience of a man who had done this 100 times before. He cleared a narrow lane through the undergrowth, just wide enough for a bullet, and settled his rifle into the natural rest formed by 2 twisted roots. Yuna set up beside him with the spotting scope and began reading the wind. Through his scope, Eli could see the fortress courtyard in perfect detail, the iron scale sentries on the walls, the supply crates stacked near the entrance, and Sub-General Thrawn standing in the center with his helmet off, his armored chest broad and proud as he barked orders to his soldiers. 1,400 meters away, through dense fungal growth and a shifting crosswind that changed direction every 40 seconds. No alien targeting system on this planet could make that shot. The electromagnetic interference alone would scatter any guided projectile or energy beam into uselessness. It was a shot that required no technology at all, only a steady hand, a trained eye, and the kind of patience that could not be programmed into a machine. Eli controlled his breathing. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4. Yuna whispered beside him, her eye pressed to the spotting scope, reading the wind flags she had memorized from the way the fungal spores drifted across the courtyard. Wind is left to right, 6 miles per hour, gusting to 9, she murmured. Humidity is through the roof. Drop the elevation half a click. Distance confirmed, 1,412 meters. Eli made the adjustments without looking away from the scope. His fingers moved on the turrets with the muscle memory of 10,000 hours of practice. Call it, he whispered. Yuna watched the wind for 3 more seconds, waiting for the gust pattern to cycle. Send it. Eli's fingers settled on the trigger like it had always been there, and he squeezed. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, and the jungle swallowed the sound before it even finished echoing. It crossed 1,400 meters in just over 2 seconds. A tiny piece of copper-jacketed metal, spinning through humid air, slicing through fungal spores, riding the wind with the precision of a thing that had been designed for one single purpose, and nothing else. It did not glow. It did not hum. It did not emit any energy signature that any sensor in the known galaxy was built to detect. It was just metal and momentum, invisible and silent, and absolutely merciless. Sub-General Thrawn never heard it coming. The round struck him in the neck joint, the narrow gap between his chest plate and his helmet ring where the armor was thinnest, and the simulation tag embedded in the round detonated on impact. Thrawn's armor flashed red from collar to boot, and the massive Draelith warrior staggered sideways with a look of pure disbelief on his face, before the system locked his exoskeleton in place, freezing him where he stood like a statue. He was dead, or as dead as the simulation allowed, and he had not even known he was in danger. The courtyard erupted into chaos. 12 iron-scale soldiers spun in every direction, plasma lances raised, scanning the jungle with every instrument they had. Their helmet sensors swept for energy signatures, thermal blooms, electromagnetic pulses, cloaking field distortions, anything that would tell them where the shot had come from. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. A bullet had no energy signature. A chemical propellant left no electromagnetic trace. A copper jacket, cooling in humid air, was invisible to thermal sensors, designed to detect plasma discharges and particle beams. Eli Cole and his rifle were a ghost in a world built to hunt machines, and the Draelith sensors had no category for what had just happened to them. Eli chambered another round. The second shot hit the iron-scale lieutenant, standing 3 meters to the left of Thrawn's frozen body, center mass, right through the power coupling on his chest plate. The simulation tag flashed, and the lieutenant went rigid. The other iron scales roared and opened fire into the jungle, in the general direction they thought the shot might have come from. But they were firing blind, and their plasma bolts tore through fungal trunks and undergrowth without hitting anything that mattered. Eli was already moving. This was the part that separated a good sniper from a great one, not the shooting, but the movement between shots. Eli had planned 3 firing positions along the ridge before he ever pulled the trigger, each one connected by a low crawl path he had cleared during setup. He slithered 6 meters to his left, settled behind a new rest, and acquired his next target in under 8 seconds. The third shot dropped an iron-scale sergeant who had been trying to organize a search party. The fourth hit a soldier who had climbed the fortress wall to get a better vantage point. The fifth caught a Draelith communication officer in the shoulder joint as he tried to send a distress signal. 5 shots, 5 kills, in under 40 seconds. And the Iron Scales still did not know where he was. On the orbital command station high above Corvan 9, every alien general in the observation room was standing. The holographic display showed the fortress courtyard in real time, and the red elimination markers were appearing one after another like drops of blood on a clean floor. The Draelith observers were rigid with fury, their claws digging into the railing. The Velesi clicked in rapid agitation. The Thessary analysts were already pulling data, their thin fingers flying across holographic interfaces. Vorath Kale stood at the center of the room and said nothing. His burning eyes were locked on the display, and his jaw was clenched so tight that the scales along his neck had turned white. He watched his soldiers die one by one, and he could not see the enemy that was killing them. Down on the surface, Ghost Delgado was already inside the fortress perimeter. She had begun her infiltration 20 minutes before Eli fired his first shot. Crawling through a drainage channel that ran beneath the fortress wall, a channel she had identified during her reconnaissance the day before and marked on her hand-drawn map. She moved through the dark passage on her belly, with the patience of a woman who had earned her call sign by disappearing in plain sight during joint exercises with 3 different Allied Special Forces units. She emerged inside the fortress like smoke rising from a crack in the earth. While the iron scales were focused on the jungle, scanning for an enemy they could not find, firing at shadows that did not exist, Ghost planted infrared target markers on 4 of the remaining soldiers. The markers were invisible to Draelith sensors, but lit up like bonfires through Eli's smart optics scope. She also placed 3 directional charges along the fortress's only viable retreat path, the narrow stone corridor that led down the back of the hill into the jungle beyond. They were not explosive. The simulation rules prohibited lethal ordnance, but they were loaded with impact-tagged pellets that would eliminate anything within a 10-meter cone. Okonkwo had positioned himself at the base of that corridor 30 minutes ago, dug into a shallow fighting position covered with fungal debris, invisible and patient as stone. The trap was set. Eli fired again, this time at an IR-marked target Ghost had tagged near the eastern wall. The iron scale dropped, and the remaining 7 soldiers finally made the decision that every trapped unit eventually makes. They chose to retreat. They fell back through the stone corridor in a tight column, plasma lances covering their rear, moving with the disciplined speed of elite soldiers who knew they were in trouble, but believed they could fight their way out of anything. They ran directly into Okonkwo's kill zone. The directional charges detonated in sequence, 3 sharp cracks that echoed across the hilltop, and a storm of impact-tagged pellets swept through the corridor like horizontal rain. 5 iron scales flashed red and froze in mid-stride. The remaining 2 tried to reverse direction and were met by 2 final shots from Eli's rifle that dropped them before they could take a single step back into the courtyard. Silence fell over the fortress. It had taken 6 minutes and 47 seconds from first shot to last. The entire Iron Scale Vanguard, the most feared small unit fighting force in the Galactic Concord, had been eliminated by 4 humans with no energy weapons, no shields, no powered armor, no drones, no cloaking technology, and no advanced sensors. Unipark climbed the fortress wall and planted the Earth flag on the highest point, a standard United Earth Defense Force banner that snapped in the jungle wind. Beside it, she tied a smaller flag that Eli had carried in his breast pocket since the day he graduated from Scout Sniper School. A hand-sewn American flag, faded and soft from years of being carried close to his heart. Ghost Delgado appeared on the wall beside her, like she had materialized from the stone itself. And Okonkwo hauled himself up a moment later, breathing hard but grinning. Eli did not climb the wall. He stayed on the ridge, prone behind his rifle, scanning the jungle for threats that might never come, because that was what a sniper did. He watched, and he waited, and he kept his people safe. On the orbital station, the observation room had gone completely silent. The holographic replay showed the entire engagement from start to finish. The impossible first shot, the methodical elimination, the flawless infiltration. The alien generals watched it with expressions that ranged from disbelief to fascination to something that looked very much like fear. A Thessari analyst broke the silence. She was a small creature, barely 4 feet tall, with luminous silver eyes and a voice like rustling silk, and when she spoke, every general in the room turned to listen. "Their weapons have no power signatures," she said, her voice carrying the flat calm of someone stating a mathematical certainty. "They use no energy that our sensors are designed to detect. They are invisible to every standard military scanning system in the Concord's arsenal. Every single one. We have no countermeasure, no detection protocol, and no defense doctrine for projectile weapons of this type. In 1,400 years of combined military development across 42 species, not one of us ever considered that the absence of technology could be a tactical advantage." She paused and looked directly at Vorith Kale. "We have no defense against this. The room stayed silent for a long time. Voreth Kale replayed the footage of Eli's first shot, the one that crossed 1,400 meters of jungle and struck a 2-inch gap in powered armor. And he watched it 11 times without speaking. On the 12th viewing, he turned away from the display and walked toward the exit. He stopped at the door and spoke without turning around. "Get me a meeting with Admiral Holt," he said, and his voice was quieter than anyone in the room had ever heard it. Not at the summit, not in public, privately. He left the room, and the door closed behind him, and every general who remained understood that something fundamental had just changed. The galaxy's greatest warrior had just watched a quiet man with a primitive weapon do something impossible, and for the first time in 200 years of war, Voreth Kale did not know what to do about it. The room was small by Draelith standards, which meant it was enormous by human ones. A private chamber aboard Vareth Prime, with curved walls of dark metal, and a single viewport that looked out into the cold black of space. There was no table, no chairs, no decoration of any kind. The Draelith did not believe in comfort during serious conversation. Voreth Kale stood with his back to the viewport, and his shadow stretched across the floor like a fallen monument. Admiral Catherine Holt entered alone, as he had requested. She wore her dress uniform and carried nothing in her hands. She was not a small woman, but standing before Voreth, she looked like a child standing before a mountain, and yet she did not shrink, did not hunch, did not lower her eyes. She stood the way she always stood, which was like someone who had decided a long time ago that fear was a luxury she could not afford. Voreth did not greet her. He did not insult her. He simply looked at her for a long moment, with those burning orange eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was stripped of every trace of the arrogance that had defined him at the weapons exhibition. What remained was something raw and honest, the voice of a warrior confronting a truth he did not want to accept. "How long?" he said. Holt tilted her head slightly. "How long what?" "How long have your kind been killing each other with these weapons, with metal and fire and nothing else?" Holt considered the question. She could have been diplomatic, could have softened the answer, could have dressed it up in the careful language of interspecies relations. She chose not to. "About 1,000 years," she said. Voreth went still. He had fought wars for 200 years, 2 centuries of blood and fire and conquest that had made him the most decorated general in Draelith history. He had believed that this made him the most experienced warrior in the Concord, and perhaps in the galaxy itself. Humanity had been perfecting the art of killing with projectile weapons for 10 times longer than his entire military career. He turned to the viewport and stared into the stars, and Holt had the rare good sense to let the silence do its work. When he spoke again, his voice was very quiet. "My people developed plasma weapons 400 years ago. Before that, we used edged weapons, blades and claws and teeth. We were predators long before we were soldiers, and we have always believed that the weapon is secondary to the warrior who wields it. But your people," he paused, and his claws tightened against the viewport frame. "Your people never stopped. You built your killing tools, and then you turned them on each other, and you refined them and improved them and mastered them across 100 generations of war against yourselves." "Yes," Holt said, because there was nothing else to say. "That is why the shot was impossible," Voreth said. "Not because the weapon was advanced, because the weapon was ancient, and the hand that held it carried 1,000 years of practice." 3 decks below, in the modest quarters assigned to Earth's delegation, Eli Cole sat on the edge of his bunk and cleaned his rifle. He did this every evening without exception, the same way he had done it every evening since he was 19 years old. Breaking down the weapon into its components, inspecting each part, wiping away residue and moisture, oiling the action, reassembling it with hands that moved from memory rather than thought. It was a ritual as old as his career, and it calmed him the way prayer calmed other men. Eli had not always been calm. He had grown up in a town called Huntsville, in the pine woods of East Texas, where the summers were long, and the sky was so wide that a boy could lie on his back in the grass and feel like he was falling upward into blue forever. His grandfather, a Vietnam veteran named Roy Cole, had put a rifle in his hands when he was 7 years old, and taught him to shoot the way he taught him everything else, with patience, repetition, and a quiet expectation of excellence that never needed to be spoken aloud. Roy Cole never talked about the war. He did not need to. Eli could see it in the way his grandfather's hands sometimes trembled when he thought no one was watching, in the way he stood on the porch at night and stared into the dark like he was waiting for something that would never come, in the way he held his grandson's shoulder just a little too tight when he said goodbye. Eli joined the Marines at 18 because it felt like the only honest thing to do. He was good at shooting, better than good, and the Corps recognized it quickly and sent him to Scout Sniper School, where he discovered that the thing he was truly gifted at was not pulling the trigger, but everything that came before it: the patience, the observation, the calculation, the stillness. He served in the 3rd Pacific Conflict at 24 and killed a man for the first time at a distance of 800 meters on a rooftop in Manila. He remembered the moment with perfect clarity: the crosswind, the humidity, the way his heart had tried to race and he had forced it to slow, and the strange emptiness that followed the shot, like an echo that never faded. He killed again and again and again. Over 14 years of service across 3 conflicts, Eli Cole accumulated 127 confirmed kills, each one recorded in a small leather notebook he kept in his breast pocket beside the hand-sewn American flag. He did not write names because he rarely knew them. He wrote dates, distances, and wind conditions because those were the things a sniper needed to remember. He did not celebrate his kills. He did not boast about them. He did not display them like trophies. They sat inside him like stones at the bottom of a river, heavy and permanent and smoothed by time, but never gone. The galaxy did not know any of this when they laughed at his rifle. They did not know about the 1,000 years of human violence that had shaped the weapon he carried, or the 14 years of personal war that had shaped the man who carried it. They saw a primitive tool and assumed a primitive warrior, and that assumption was the most dangerous mistake any of them had ever made. The political fallout from the combat trials spread across the Concord like wildfire. Some species demanded humanity's expulsion. The Corvathi ambassador called kinetic weapons barbaric instruments of an uncivilized species. 3 smaller delegations supported the motion, arguing that projectile weapons violated the spirit of technological progress that the Concord was built upon. Others saw things very differently. The Thesari, whose homeworld sat on the edge of Concord space, exposed and vulnerable to the growing threat of the Hollow, formally requested a platoon of human snipers to reinforce their planetary defense forces. The request was unprecedented. No species had ever asked another for ground troops, because ground combat was considered beneath the dignity of spacefaring civilizations. The frontier species supported the Thesari. They had been living under the shadow of the Hollow for decades, a mysterious swarm of biomechanical predators that emerged from extragalactic space and consumed everything in their path. And they were tired of waiting for the Concord's core species to take the threat seriously. If the humans could fight, the frontier wanted them fighting. Vorath Kale said nothing publicly, but what he did privately sent shockwaves through the Dralith military establishment. He reviewed Eli Cole's service record, every mission, every deployment, every confirmed kill, and when he reached the number 127, he went very still. In Dralith culture, a warrior who had personally slain more than 100 enemies in combat was granted the rank of Earthraken, apex predator, a title so rare that fewer than 30 Dralith in living history had ever earned it. It was the highest honor a Dralith warrior could achieve. and it was never granted to an outsider. But the code was clear. The kills were confirmed. The number was beyond dispute. By the laws of the Dominion, Elijah Cole was Vorath Kale's equal. Vorath went to find him. He found Eli exactly where he expected to find him. Alone, cleaning his rifle, sitting in the kind of focused silence that Vorath recognized because he had seen it in himself after every battle he had ever fought. It was the silence of a man who had taken lives and carried the weight of them without complaint. Vorath stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. Then he spoke. "May I hold it?" Eli looked up. His face showed no surprise, no fear, no hostility, just the quiet attentiveness of a man who measured everything before reacting to anything. He studied Vorath for a long moment, and then he held out the rifle. Vorath took it, and this time he held it with care. He turned it in his massive hands, feeling the weight, the balance, the cold precision of the barrel, and the warmth of the wooden stock. He pressed it to his shoulder, the way he had seen Eli do, and sighted down the scope. And for a brief moment he understood, not with his mind, but with his body, what it felt like to look through that glass and know that you held the power of life and death in a single trigger pull. "Tell me about it," Vorath said. Eli told him, simply, honestly, in the plain language of a man who did not waste words. He explained the cartridge, the powder, the bullet, the rifling, the optics. He explained ballistics and windage, and the way a sniper learns to read the world in terms of distance and angle and time of flight. He spoke without pride or showmanship, the way a craftsman speaks about his tools. Vorath listened to every word. When Eli was finished, the great general set the rifle down gently and looked at the human with eyes that held something that had not been there before, something that the Drelith did not have a word for, because it was an emotion they rarely experienced. Respect, true respect for something they did not understand. "I was wrong to mock the weapon," Vorath said, and the words came from deep in his chest, like stones being laid. "I understand now. It is not the weapon that is dangerous. It is the 1,000 years of death that forged the hand that holds it." Eli said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. They stood together in silence, the alien conqueror and the Texas sniper, and for one quiet moment, two warriors from opposite ends of the galaxy understood each other perfectly. Then the alarms went off. The red emergency lights flooded the corridor, and a Concord-wide alert screamed through every speaker on the station. The Hollow had breached the outer perimeter. 3 colony worlds were under siege. The swarm was larger than anything they had encountered before, and it was heading straight for Thesari space. The Concord fleet was mobilizing, and for the first time in history, the request went out not for plasma lances or particle beams or graviton disruptors. They were requesting snipers. Thesar Minoris was burning. The colony world had been a paradise 48 hours ago. Rolling fields of golden grain, crystal blue rivers, and the gentle spires of Thesari farming settlements rising from the plains like fingers reaching for a lavender sky. Now the sky was black with smoke, and the fields were crawling with nightmares. The Hollow had come from the dark between galaxies, and they came hungry. They were biomechanical horrors, eyeless, boneless things that moved on too many legs and adapted to anything that tried to kill them. Each one was different, shaped by the swarm's hive intelligence to fill whatever role the invasion required. Some were small and fast, built for scouting, with razor-thin limbs that could slice through armor plate like paper. Others were massive siege organisms, as large as buildings, that hammered fortified positions with organic artillery that fired chunks of calcified bone at supersonic speeds. And all of them were connected to the Nexus organisms, 3 mountainous creatures embedded in the planet's surface, like parasites burrowed into living flesh. The Nexus organisms were the brain of the swarm. They pulsed with bioluminescent light, and every hollow creature on the planet moved according to their will. Destroy the Nexus, and the swarm would collapse into mindless, uncoordinated animals that could be hunted down and eliminated. Leave the Nexus alive, and the swarm would keep evolving, keep adapting, keep consuming, until there was nothing left. The Concord fleet held orbit, and pounded the surface with bombardments that shook the planet to its core. But the Nexus organisms had burrowed deep, and surrounded themselves with layers of biological shielding that absorbed energy weapons like sponges absorbing water. Plasma strikes scorched the surface, but barely scratched the Nexus. Particle beams were scattered by the reflective carapaces. The creatures had evolved specifically to counter the Concord's most powerful weapons. The Hollow were learning, and they were learning fast. That was when the dropships came down through the burning sky. Earth's first expeditionary sniper company descended in 12 transports alongside Dralith Ironscale assault teams, Thessari drone coordination units, and Valesi swarm fighters. It was the first time in galactic history that this many species had deployed together on a single battlefield. And the sight of it, the mismatched ships falling through fire and smoke in tight formation, was the kind of thing that would be painted on walls and sung about in songs for centuries to come. Eli Cole sat in the lead transport, with his rifle across his knees and his team around him. Una Park checked her spotting scope for the 20th time. Okonkwo loaded magazines with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Ghost Delgado sat in the corner, with her eyes closed and her breathing slow, already somewhere else in her mind, already behind enemy lines. The transport hit ground hard, and the ramp dropped, and the heat hit them like a furnace door swinging open. The air tasted like ash and copper and something organic and wrong. And the sound was the worst part. A low, constant hum that vibrated in the bones. The sound of a million hollow creatures, moving and clicking and screaming across a dying world. They move fast. The plan was simple in concept and horrifying in execution. 3 assault teams would push toward the 3 Nexus organisms simultaneously. Each team was a combined force of Dralith heavy infantry, human snipers, and support units from other species. The Dralith would break through the swarm and create corridors. The humans would use those corridors to reach firing positions within range of the Nexus brain cores. And then, the snipers would do what snipers do. Eli's target was the primary Nexus organism, the largest of the 3, embedded in the ruins of the colony's capital city, like a tumor growing from the bones of civilization. It was the size of a skyscraper, its body a pulsing mass of organic tissue and biomechanical armor. And its brain core was buried deep inside a structure the analysts called the Command Maw, a massive opening in the creature's upper body that had opened periodically to issue swarm-wide orders through bioluminescent pulses. The brain core was only exposed when the maw was open, and it was only open for less than 3 seconds at a time. The firing distance would be 2,200 meters, far beyond the rifle's standard effective range, through an urban canyon choked with rubble, debris, crosswinds, and thousands of swarming hollow drones. It was, by every technical definition, an impossible shot. Voroth Kale had personally requested command of the assault force clearing Eli's corridor. The great general dropped from his transport in full combat armor, his plasma lance charged and humming, and he hit the ground like a thunderbolt. Behind him poured 200 Ironscale soldiers, the largest Dralith ground deployment in a generation. And they crashed into the hollow swarm with the fury of a species that had been born to fight. The battle was brutal and immediate. Hollow creatures swarmed from every ruin and every shadow, climbing walls and bursting from the ground and dropping from the smoke-filled sky. The iron scales met them with plasma fire and armored fists, and the streets of the dead city became a meat grinder of alien flesh and burning chitin. Vorath led from the front, as he always did, his plasma lance carved through hollow bodies like a torch through ice, and his armored bulk crushed anything that got too close. He was magnificent, a creature built for war, fighting the kind of war he was built for. And even in the horror of that battlefield, there was something beautiful about the way he moved. But the Hollow adapted. They learned to avoid the plasma fire, darting between shots with reflexes that got faster with every passing minute. They began targeting the gaps in iron scale armor, the joints, the visors, the power couplings, with surgical precision that no mindless swarm should have been capable of. Draelith's soldiers started falling, and the advance slowed, and for a terrible moment, it seemed like the corridor was going to collapse. Then a hollow pack leader, a massive creature with blade arms as long as a man was tall, broke through the line and lunged at Eli. Vorath caught it in midair. He seized the thing by its throat with one clawed hand, and drove his plasma lance through its skull with the other. And the creature thrashed and screamed and died 3 feet from Eli's face. Vorath hurled the corpse aside and turned to Eli, and there was blood. His own blood, dark blue and steaming, running from a deep slash across his side where another hollow had caught him during the intercept. "Take your shot, human," Vorath snarled through gritted teeth, planting himself between Eli and the swarm like a wall of iron and fury. I did not come this far to die before seeing it. Eli ran. He sprinted through the corridor the iron scales had carved, Ghost Delgado clearing the path ahead of him with a combat knife and a silence that terrified even the hollow. Okonkwo laying down suppressive fire behind him with a belt-fed weapon that roared like an angry god, and Yuna keeping pace at his side with the spotting scope already up and reading conditions on the move. They reached the firing position, a collapsed building on the edge of the urban canyon, overlooking the Nexus organism 2 kilometers away, and Eli dropped prone and set up his rifle in 4 seconds flat. The Nexus organism filled his scope like a mountain of living horror. He could see the command maw, closed now, sealed shut like a wound, the brain core hidden behind meters of biomechanical armor. He could see the hollow drones swarming around it in protective patterns. He could see the rubble-choked canyon between him and the target, the crosswinds whipping through the ruined buildings, the dust and smoke and ash that turned the air into a shifting curtain of interference. 2,200 meters, beyond maximum effective range, through conditions that would defeat any targeting computer ever built. Yuna settled beside him, and her voice went flat and clinical, the voice of a spotter in the zone, where there was no fear and no doubt, only data. Distance 2,214 meters, wind right to left, 8 miles per hour, gusting to 14 through the canyon, humidity 91%, temperature 42 Celsius, Coriolis drift at this latitude, 0.3 inches right. Bullet drop. Eli, you are going to have to hold almost 9 feet above the target at this range. Eli made the adjustments. His hands did not shake. His breathing did not change. He was somewhere beyond fear now, in the place where everything was math and wind and the slow, steady rhythm of his heart. "Maw is still closed," Yuna said, her eye pressed to the scope. "Stand by. Stand by. Swarm pattern is shifting. She is going to open." Eli watched through his scope and waited with the patience of a man who had been waiting his entire life for this moment without knowing it. The Nexus organism shuddered, a ripple of movement that traveled across its massive body like a wave, and the command maw began to open. The biomechanical plates separated with a wet grinding sound that Eli could not hear but could somehow feel in his chest, and the brain core appeared, a pulsing luminous organ the size of a car, exposed and vulnerable for the first time. 3 seconds. That was all he had. Yuna's voice was barely a whisper. "Send it." Eli squeezed the trigger, and the rifle kicked against his shoulder, like an old friend shaking his hand. The bullet flew for 3.1 seconds. It crossed 2,200 meters of ruined city, through dust and ash and smoke, through crosswinds that tried to push it off course, past swarming hollow drones that never saw it, and could not have stopped it if they had. It dropped 9 feet from its original trajectory, and Eli had accounted for every inch. It drifted right from the Coriolis effect, and Eli had accounted for that too. It was just a piece of metal, just copper and lead, just a thing shaped by human hands and launched by human chemistry. But it flew true, because the man who sent it had spent a lifetime learning how to make it fly true. It struck the brain core dead center. The Nexus organism screamed, a sound that was not a sound, a psychic pulse that rippled across the continent and dropped every hollow creature within 100 kilometers to the ground, like puppets with their strings cut. The massive organism convulsed, its maw snapping shut too late, its body beginning to collapse in on itself like a building losing its foundation. Bioluminescent light flickered and died along its surface, and the swarm connected to it went haywire. Creatures running in circles, attacking each other, slamming into walls, falling from the sky. The primary nexus was dead. Across the planet, the other 2 assault teams, inspired by the approach, armed with kinetic weapons that had been rushed from Earth's armories and distributed to joint human-alien fire teams, destroyed the remaining Nexus organisms within the hour. The hollow swarm, severed from its controlling intelligence, collapsed into chaos and was systematically hunted down by combined Concord forces over the following 3 days. Thessar Minoris was saved. On the battlefield in the shadow of the dead Nexus, Vorath Kale stood among his surviving iron scales, with blue blood still running from his wound, and looked across the rubble to where Eli Cole was quietly disassembling his rifle. The human's hands moved with the same unhurried precision they always moved with. Steady, patient, deliberate, as if he had not just fired the shot that saved a planet. Vorath placed his clawed fist over his chest. The Drelith salute, reserved for warriors of the Apex Predator caste, and held it there. Every surviving Drelith soldier on the battlefield followed suit. 200 fists over 200 chests, pressed against armor stained with blue blood and alien gore, held in honor of a quiet human with a primitive weapon who had done the impossible. Eli looked up from his rifle, met Vorath's eyes across the distance, and gave a single nod. That was all. That was enough. 6 months later, at the next Concord Military Summit on Vareth Prime, the weapons exhibition included a new display. It sat in a glass case on a pedestal of Thessari crystal, positioned at the center of the hall where every delegation would see it. A single .338 Norma Magnum round, brass casing polished to a mirror shine, displayed with the same reverence that other species gave to their most advanced technological achievements. The plaque beneath it was engraved in 12 galactic languages, and it read, "Sometimes the simplest things are the most dangerous. Admiral Catherine Holt, United Earth Defense Force." Eli was not at the summit. He was back in Texas, on his grandfather's porch, in a rocking chair that creaked with every slow push of his boot against the worn wooden boards. The sun was going down over the pine trees, and the sky was that particular shade of deep orange that only East Texas could produce, and the air smelled like cut grass and gun oil and home. His rifle leaned against the railing beside him, cleaned and oiled and ready, the way it always was. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and read the message from Admiral Holt. "They want you back. The Hollow hit another system." Eli looked at the message for a long time. He looked at the sunset and the pine trees and the wide open sky that had been his whole world before the stars came calling. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the railing, and stood. He picked up his rifle, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward his truck. The screen door swung shut behind him with a sound like a quiet goodbye. The stars had learned what East Texas had always known, that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not the weapon that shines the brightest or roars the loudest. It is the quiet man who knows how to use it.